right, welcome everyone. Hello, it's day 3 of the summit. You know what that means. It's time to have all your energy ready for the most interactive plenary session to date. I know that's what you really want on the last day of a very intense summit, but it's going to be fun, I promise. I'm Megan, and I'm going to be joined in this session. I'll ask them to come up by Asia Hadley, who's the Director of Partnerships at Candid, if you just want to come and stand up, and Bilal Taylor, who's the Vice President of Culture and Community at Charity Navigator. And in the next hour, we're going to explore how we can build the feedback field as a whole. So how do we, as a collective, move closer to our common goal of making listening and responding to feedback the norm across nonprofits and philanthropic foundations. This is going to be a really interactive session, so to get you in the mood, I am going to invite you to do a little bit of a reflection. So we're going to do a little guided reflection. Feel free to close your eyes if you want to, if that interferes with your avocado toast eating or your coffee drinking. Don't close your eyes. But I want you to imagine that I know how to use a clicker, which apparently I do not. I want you to imagine that a friend or a colleague or a peer comes to you and they say, okay, here's the deal. My organization wants to get better at listening to the people at the heart of our work. And we're going to do that. But here's my problem. I want to know whether we're on the right track. Like over time, I want to know whether we are actually moving in the right direction of getting better at listening and responding to people. And I don't know what to do. Like, I don't know how to get a sense of that. I want you to think about what's the piece of advice you would give to your friend. Like, what would you tell them to pay attention to or to track? Or what question would you tell them to ask on a regular basis that will give them a sense of whether they're moving in the right direction, that will give them a sense of whether their organization is getting better over time at listening and responding to the people they seek to serve? So I want you to think about what advice you would give to your friend. And then when you're ready, I'd like you to reach the middle of your table. There's some sticky notes. I'd like you to grab a sticky note, and there's some pens there as well. And I'd like you to just write down a couple words that capture the advice that you would give to your friend. And as you're doing that, and when you've got a couple words down, it just has to be something that'll jog your memory. It doesn't have to be a full description. If you'd like to, I'm going to invite you to give it to the facilitator who's seated at your table. So can I ask all the table facilitators to wave their hand in the air? So these fine folks are going to be leading the conversation. There are multiple of you at some tables. So write down a couple notes that capture the advice that you would give to your friend. And then if you'd like to, you can keep it for yourself, or you can pass it to your table facilitator. And we will be coming back to those reflections in a moment. So I'll give you a moment to do that. As you do that, I'm going to explain a little bit about why I'm asking that question, why I'm asking you to reflect on that question. So, as I mentioned, this session is about diving into how we as a collective can build the field. And the reason we're asking this question, everyone in this room is a champion of feedback, right? Like, you wouldn't be here if you didn't think it was important and you weren't committed to listening well. But what do we do about everyone who's not in the room, right? About like tens of thousands of nonprofits and foundations who aren't here and don't necessarily think that listening is a priority. How do we make listening and responding to feedback the norm across every nonprofit, every foundation? That's what we're going to be looking at today. And Asia, Bilal, and I are part of a collective represented by the organizations up here called the Irritants for Change. which is why you don't let collectives name themselves. But the idea is like they're like irritating the sector. I don't know, like they're the piece of grit and an oyster that, I don't know, ask Dennis if you want to blame someone. But the Irritants started working together about 5 years ago, and they're a group of nonprofit platforms like Candid and Charity Navigator and feedback practitioners, and they were asking themselves, how can we use the power of our platforms and our expertise to help make listening and responding to feedback the norm? One of their first initiatives was called How We Listen. And I'm actually going to invite Asia to take the mic, and she's going to explain what that is, what we're learning from it, and why that informs what we hope to do next as a collective, but also with all of you today. So, Asia, over to you.
Thank you so much, Megan. Before we launch into what we've learned from How We Listen, it's helpful to know what a Candid profile is. Spoiler alert. Hint, it's a tool for sharing your organization's story and building trust. Candid manages and shares a lot of data. For example, tracking nonprofits registered in the US, organizations with seals of transparency, and tracking nonprofits that have shared demographic information in the last 2 years, among many other data points. Where does this data come from, and where does it go? The data is collected from nonprofits and foundations themselves, and from the IRS and other government data. This information then flows into Candid's database, and it is filtered through Candid's web tools, such as Foundation Directory Online, GuideStar, and with our network of data partners. And we have about 250 plus donation, grantmaker, and research platforms. From there, nonprofits, individuals, foundations, they can find out information about specific nonprofit organizations. So how does this data flow help a nonprofit share information about its feedback practices? Well, Candid's profile has a section called How We Listen. Nonprofits can fill out this section, and it starts with a very simple question. Does your organization collect feedback from the people you serve? Now, we note from the people you serve, so we're not talking about staff members, we're not talking about volunteers, board members, or donors. We're talking about the people that are at the heart of your mission. How We Listen then asks about a nonprofit's intent to listen and their listen practices. When an organization completes How We Listen, that information is displayed on their Candid profile. And then How We Listen answers are automatically fed into Charity Navigator's Encompass rating system. So once an organization has reflected on and shared their practices, they earn points. They earn points from, and Bilal is going to go into this in a little while, on the Culture and Community Beacon. This is Charity Navigator's Encompass rating system. As you can see, over 16,500 nonprofits have filled out How We Listen. And most of that participation has come in the last year. How We Listen was launched in 2019. And since How We Listen participated started feeding into Charity Navigator's Encompass rating system, that's where we saw the most progress happen. Thousands of nonprofits are excited to showcase their listening practice with How We Listen. And nonprofits across different sectors and different size budgets have participated in How We Listen. The nonprofits that participate in How We Listen overwhelmingly report that they are, in fact, listening to the people that they serve. And they report making changes based on the feedback, adjustments in operations, adjustments to their program offering and providing new services, and even changing how staff interact with clients. Furthermore, How We Listen participants are sharing rich stories about how they're listening and responding to that feedback, making changes that shift power from those that have power to those that are being served by their mission. Power over strategies, decisions, and resources. So, I know this sounds pretty positive, but if you can hear a but coming, you're absolutely right. We see a few patterns in the How We Listen data that give us pause. For example, just under 30% of nonprofits participating in How We Listen share that they do not have feedback, challenges to collecting feedback. Now, we know that everyone in this room experiences challenges in collecting feedback. So that data point definitely gives us pause. We also see that only 40% of participating nonprofits report a recent change in response to the feedback. We know that a high-quality feedback loop, part of that is making changes, and we want to see more changes happening. And then, only 49% of nonprofits actually close the loop. We know that now nonprofits are not talking to or sharing the feedback that they've heard with those that gave them the feedback. And part of a high-quality feedback loop is reporting back to those that gave you feedback. So, even though I'm sorry, that was so loud. I saw the gentleman jump here. Even though, we're moving in the right direction, there's a lot of positive things happening with How We Listen. We see that there are indications for room for improvement. Candid and other Irritants for Change want to support nonprofits to listen better. And to do that, we need to better understand how well they're listening now so that we know how to help them improve. That's why we're excited to be with you today. We want to explore what the big next frontier is, which is being able to discern the actual quality of nonprofit listening. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Megan.
Thank you so much, Asia. I think it's so exciting to see the hard work of Candid and Charity Navigator and other Irritants paying off in the participation and the rich sharing that's happening in How We Listen. But as Asia said, there's further to go. And right now we're seeing, that maybe one of the next frontiers for us is to actually understand how well these nonprofits are listening. What's the quality of their listening practice so that we can help them improve it. I promised you interactivity. So that's what you're going to figure out in the rest of this session. What we want to do with our remaining time is ask you to brainstorm how you would discern the quality of nonprofit listening. And how would you do that at scale across tens, if not hundreds, of thousands of nonprofits? That's going to be the exercise that your facilitators will be leading at each of the tables. And for this exercise, I want you to think of yourself as essentially like an expert consultant. Like you've been brought together around this table. You're all expert consultants. You're going to be advising a client on how they can discern the quality of nonprofit listening practice. And your client, in this case, is going to be Charity Navigator. Very, very exciting client. And Bilal is going to explain more about the challenge that he's experiencing as your client that he wants your help with. Take it away, Bilal.
Yes, you can also consider it sort of having a couch if any psychologists are in the room. For some of the work you have to do, it's really challenging. But it's really exciting to be here. My name is Bilal Taylor. I'm the Vice President for Culture and Community at Charity Navigator. And what I'm excited, and one thing I will say, I tend to like to give my friends nicknames, so I consider you all friends now. So I'm going to call you the Feedback Fam for right now. I know that's really corny. Anybody watching back home, I apologize. But again, so Charity Navigator has a really exciting opportunity right now. Most folks know us for the 9,000 organizations that we've rated for most of our lives. We're coming up on 20 years. Those 9,000 ratings were largely in the realm of financial accountability and sustainability of those practices. And so we're not going to stop doing that work, of course, but we realize, and we have an opportunity, when Asia mentioned last year in 2021, we have an opportunity to launch the Encompass rating system. This allows us to move from 9,000 organizations to nearly 200,000 organizations, a wider, diverse set of organizations, younger organizations, and literally when we talk about Encompass ratings, we want these ratings to encompass, literally, a wider range of practices that really point and signal to our donors and hopefully to the field what it means to be a healthy organization and an organization that is more able to make the impact that it wants to have in the world. One great example of that, the beacon I lead, the Culture and Community Beacon, incorporates some of that good data we saw here and really tries to get at the equitable practices that an organization is undertaking, but also how in tune and connected organizations are to the constituents that they serve and the communities that they serve, frankly. And we believe, regardless of what your mission is, there is a community being served there, and we're excited to have folks in the room today to kind of help us unpack what some of that can look like. What I'm specifically hoping that the Feedback Fam can help us brainstorm are ways that we can incorporate some of the good feedback practices that you bring to the table, some of what you've heard, into this Encompass rating system. Presently, if you fill out the How We Listen, if you fully complete the How We Listen aspect of your Candid profile, you will get full credit for that particular aspect of our beacon, which is part of the larger Encompass rating system. We do believe that this really sort of incentivizes organizations that have intentionally reflected on those practices and are willing to share them publicly. So it's not a box-checking exercise. We want you to feel comfortable to say, I'm doing this, but we also want to know as you go on that journey some of the potential issues that you may have. And as Asia mentioned, we really believe that we can go further to hopefully get to the quality of that listening in some interesting ways that we hope the group here will help us unpack. There's also the scale issue that Megan mentioned. Going from 9,000 organizations to 200,000, as you can imagine, is why I mentioned that couch. So consider this as sort of a counseling session as well. But really, as we think about that, we have sort of great power in our ratings, but that's a really great opportunity, and we think it demands of us to be able to speak to the field and our donors to say, we believe this matters, and to help folks find organizations that believe likewise. But as we think about that challenge, we can't provide direct TA to 200,000 organizations. So how do we develop a system that we can scale up that really helps us to know that these practices are being on the uptake and that there really is a high quality of these practices that are leading to organizational change? So I won't say too much more, but I am hoping that within your tables you can help give us some big, bright ideas, some sort of blue sky ideas in a couple of ways. And these ideas, we don't want you to dream too small or think too big. Any idea, no idea is too big or too small for these purposes or too granular. And you don't have to be connected to the How We Listen tool. You don't have to have a profile on www.charitynavigator.org, but I hope you do. And you don't really have to know much about our history. All you have to know is our commitment to really wanting to signal to the field that rating these practices are important. There's 4 sort of ways that I would ask you to potentially get your conversation going to think about how we might rate how well a nonprofit listens. One is based on practices. So how can we verify whether nonprofit practices that they're carrying out are indicative of high quality listening practice? Another one could be based on structure. So how well is an organization, regardless of its size, investing and supporting that functionality? Because if you're not supporting it or investing in it, we don't believe that happens. If it's not strategic plans, we don't believe that happens. Another one is based on perception. How can we sort of understand how people that are most impacted by the issues that a nonprofit is carrying out, how can we know that they believe that they're being well listened to? And the final one is based on outcome. So how can we find evidence or improvements in practice? And the last thing I will say in this regard is many people know our 4-star rating system from before, And the goal is not to say, oh, I got a 4-star and your job is done, right? This is a journey. So please, how do we think about the journey and reward folks who maybe were yesterday doing 2-star level work and today are at a 3 versus those who are at 4 stars. So sort of both folks that are listening really well today, but folks who are maybe listening a little bit better today than they were yesterday. And with that, I turn you over to the leaders of our tables, and really we look to the wisdom of the group for some of your great ideas, and nice meeting the feedback fam. That's the last time I'll say that, I promise.
Thank you so much, Bilal. All right, feedback fam, are you ready? Are you ready? Okay, so Bilal, your client, wants you to give Charity Navigator advice on how they can discern which nonprofits are listening well or which nonprofits are improving, how they listen over time. How do they discern that quality of nonprofit listening so that they can reward nonprofits that are listening well or that are improving how they listen over time? They can reward them with higher ratings under the Encompass rating system. As Bilal mentioned, each one of your tables has a facilitator who is essentially Bilal's proxy. You can think of them as the Charity Navigator representative at your table. And so we're going to work at your tables to gather ideas and advice for Charity Navigator, for your client, for the rest of the session. We'll start with maybe asking, you can ask some clarifying questions of Charity Navigator, ask them of the facilitator at your table. I am just going to make a note. I know that this work is super interesting. Every time Bilal talks about the Encompass rating system, I have like 17 more questions, and as does Bilal. So you will have time to ask those clarifying questions, but the focus here for the rest of the session will be on your ideas. I want you to be able to get that creativity, get those ideas out there. So we'll start with some clarifying questions, but if we don't have all the answers at the end of that 5 minutes, please don't let that stand in the way of starting to generate your conversation, generate your ideas. And what Bilal and I will commit to is gathering the clarifying questions that come up at your tables that maybe we don't get to or that don't have answers at your tables, and sharing resources with those after. So let's not let the good be the end or perfect be the enemy of good, however that goes. But let's take maybe 5 minutes for you to ask clarifying questions of your Charity Navigator representative at your table. Go, feedback fam. All right, we're gonna bring it back. I know that you don't maybe want to, the number of the computers that are out. I see multiple people taking notes. I see a lot of sticky notes. Again, it really makes my facilitator heart happy. So I'm gonna ask that we bring it towards the front of the room. Just so that we can get you off to your next session. But as I was walking around the room, something that really struck me and that I found really exciting was I heard so many people bringing up their own experiences, right? Outside of their identity as feedback practitioners. So whether it was like people talking about, their experiences as a teacher or as like climate activists, or I think readers of the Washington Post I heard back at that table. I heard a lot of people drawing on those experiences. And I really think that's like the power of us in this room, right? Is that we have the opportunity to change the field, to change how all nonprofits and all foundations look at listening if we work together as a group. And how we listen, and the Irritants and these over 16,000 nonprofits that are excited to share how they listen and respond to feedback, those initiatives came out of conversations like this. So I'm really excited to see what comes out of these conversations today. We will not have time this morning to report out from every table. We will be collecting notes, and I promise that we will report back on the ideas and the advice that came out of all these conversations. But I did want to invite a couple of our table facilitators to share some thoughts. So Erin, why don't you go ahead first?
We had a really impressive conversation over here. I have to congratulate our group. So we covered a very broad range of things, ranging from just simple data inputs, like how much do you budget for listening? How much staff time do you dedicate to listening? Things like that, to really creative ideas, like maybe there's a way to push out a survey to clients or to staff to let them weigh in on how well this organization is implementing listening. There were also ideas around performance goals. Like, how well is the organization setting expectations up front? Maybe that's in the form of a job description. That is this included in the job description? And then is this included in your performance measurement of staff?
Fantastic. Thank you, Erin. And thank you, that table. And I love, too, how there's like these different ways of coming at it, which to me sort of suggests we can get like maybe the full picture if we're asking these different questions. Martine, why don't you share a couple thoughts from your table?
Hi. So we started off, I just kind of named that we would collect freedom dreams, which I've been using because a lot of us are analytical, overthinkers, have analysis paralysis, as I like to call it. We try to identify like the pie in the sky or maybe even some unreal solutions for a charity navigator. But we kind of went in 3 directions, one being third parties, evaluators to provide technical assistance, to be able to provide quarterly assessments. I kind of brought up being a teacher and how when you're being observed in that one very special class that one time and having that dictate your stars or your raise for the year. So our table was talking about the frequency by which maybe a third party could check in. We named quarterly. That might be different per region or per organization. Also, we talked about involving community members and constituents in providing feedback. The intensity of sending a link to community members, like, hey, could you fill this out and tell us how you feel about how well you've been listened to, or the frequency of touch points from this nonprofit or organization. I know a lot of people who could be performative in nature and say, oh, we talked to 2 community members one time this year, check. So it'll be interesting to kind of get that community voice. And also, you know, how do we mitigate, of course, the power dynamics and also the threshold of good news? Like, who are you tapping? If 100% of constituents say this was 100% amazing, that's kind of a flag on the play. And then we talked about like self-reporting questions. So if Charity Navigator decided that they wanted to continue with self-reporting, what questions or what things could we bring up to help gauge the quality of the feedback? Or assessment of the quality. So we talked about, again, how many times do you speak to your constituents or how many touch points do you have? Assessing the modes by which you're getting feedback. Is it just one way? Is it 2 ways? Is it 3 ways? And yeah, also we mentioned sending survey links to staff members for that internal feedback. I know some staff are just chomping at the bit to be able to give their true feedback. So I don't know how scary or exciting that would be for nonprofits, but those are some of our ideas.
Fantastic. Thank you. And I love this sort of the mix of, you know, countable quantitative things like how many times a year are you doing, like how many channels do you use, and then like the qualitative sort of like what are people's perceptions. I love that as well. Can we first of all get a huge round of applause for all our table facilitators? Really appreciate what was happening at the tables. And Bilal, I know that you were also walking around. Any kind of final takeaways from what you heard that you'd like to share?
Yes, I mean, ditto to many things that were said. I want to just say thanks for the empathy I heard at the tables. I feel like folks we're grounding it in their own experience, but really looking at the field. I heard some challenges for Charity Navigator. This is not a direct quote, but some folks challenge us to not sort of add to this soul-sucking, form-filling hell that so many of us are trapped in. I won't, whoever you are, you can speak for yourself on that quote, but that really resonated. And then also this idea of nuance and sort of, as I think was said at this table, how do we think about the multiple ways that folks gather and collect data within communities, the multiple types of organizations and some of the challenges. And I really also thought the final challenge I heard, maybe I see things as a challenge and an opportunity, was this idea of closing the loop, of how we as Charity Navigator can also close the loop. So many times that we're doing the feedback part, but there is a loop involved, and if we're not knowing where that feedback is going, maybe that it just goes into the soul-sucking, form-filling hell and the abyss that we're going to try to help avoid. But I really appreciated the analysis I heard, but really the deep empathy and thoughtfulness that I heard at all the tables. And what I will commit to is certainly going around and looking at all these. And rarely can I say I appreciate someone giving me extra work, but I appreciate this. And each idea will be heard. And we have a forum we call Tender with an E. But I really invite folks to send emails to me. That's a place where you can sort of give advice to Charity Navigator ideas, but please reach out to me if you feel like we haven't heard it. I would love for this group to hold me accountable if you do not feel like your input was valued today. So thank you very much for the work. The folks who were my proxies, you did a better job than me. Please don't take my job, but thank you very kindly for all the good input today.
Thank you, Bilal, and thank you, Asia, as well. And thank you all. I look forward to reporting back out on these conversations, hearing from you. That is Bilal at charitynavigator.org if anyone wants to share it. No, that's not actually his email, but that soul-sucking hell, just let him know. But thank you all for your participation and your creativity and your wonderful ideas. And with that, I will turn it back to Britt.
All right. One more round of applause for Megan for being an amazing facilitator. Bilal, Asia, thank you so much. We're now on to our last breakout session.